Yo, what's up guys? Tino here. Welcome back. We got 3.27 on the horizon, so I thought I'd let you guys know exactly what I'm doing on the league start and what I'm planning. I'm going to be playing some stream clips here in the background because a while back I did a private league reset. And in that private league reset, I was just trying a bunch of builds to figure out what I wanted to play for 3.27. My favorite thing so far, out of all the things that I tested, and I tested a few things, including Elementalistic Ignite things, Fire Trap of Blasting, and that kind of stuff. So my favorite thing was Viper Strike of MAMBA. Viper Strike of MAMBA is really good for high density mapping scenarios. What I mean by that is any kind of mechanic that has a lot of monsters packed together, it really excels at. For example, Expedition. Expedition is going to be my league start plan this time around. What I plan to do is essentially, get as many logbooks as possible and then trade them with async trade and that kind of stuff. And as we know, Breach is the new mechanic. And as you can see here on screen, Expedition is crazy with Mamba because of the proliferation, which I'll explain the mechanics a little bit later, but yeah, Expedition goes insane with Mamba. Because there are so many monsters packed together, because of how proliferation works, it's essentially multiplicative with pack size, allowing you to deal insane amounts of damage spread across multiple monsters, making the clear just very buttery smooth. And that is going to also translate to Breach, so long as there are a lot of monsters stacked together, which we can presume there are, because it's going to be much like current Breach. There's quite a lot of other mechanics it excels at. Anything that is, as I said, has pack size and there's monsters stacked together. So things like Breach, you got Ritual as well, which is pretty good. There's, unfortunately, Harbinger doesn't work really well with it at all because the Harbingers actually despawn, which doesn't allow you to actually spread the poisons to all of the other Harbingers. So that's the mechanic I'm going to be skipping for sure. However, Essence is also really good on Mamba because Essence usually spawns with around 5 monsters next to the main guy. And so if you wait for those 5 monsters to break free and then you kill one of them, the poison spreads across to all of those monsters. As you can see here on the screen, you kind of wait and then you want to be spreading your poison onto the main guy. And once that happens, you just kind of like passively kill the monster, which I kind of failed to do in this example. But it sort of like kills the monster and makes the clear very smooth for essences and things like that. So long as you're sort of like managing the spread and keeping that in mind, so you're not like killing the monsters before the big one is actually spawning. There's a few things that I would like to also add to the beginning of this video, because a lot of people think that you have to have clusters to play Viper Strike of Mamba. Although clusters are insane for this build, each cluster adds up to like 20% multiplicative damage, and it sort of goes down from there on. But the first cluster is like insane, and then the more you add, the less effectiveness it gets. But either way, the clusters are absolutely insane, but you don't need them. You can actually use Viper Strike of Mamba from the first lap onward, so long as you grab Proliferation as your first lab, and so long as you have a little bit of flask discipline. So you're going to want to be making sure that you're clicking your flasks sequentially so that you have a flask up all the time as you're leveling. And the way that you do that is basically you're going to be clicking between one or the other flask. So I will skip through the VOD here a little bit to showcase the progression that I had with the build. Act 1, I went for a classic Caustic Arrow. You can also play, a lot of people tend to play Cobra Lash as well. That's totally fine. I opted in for Caustic Arrow. I feel like it's just the easiest thing to do on a Ranger Act 1. And you just play through Act 1 all the way to get to Mervale's Cavern. And as soon as you get to Mervale's Cavern, you unlock Poison Concoction, which is, obviously the classic. And you grab Poison Concoction, and from there on out, you can use the, normal Poison Concoction all the way until the first lab. You can see here I'm already rocking Poison Concoction on a 3 link, and it's going to be with volley and lesser multiple projectiles, and then a very slow shield charge to, supplement my movement ability with Frostblink. I use Sniper's Mark early for the additional damage, but needless to say, Poison Concoction is completely broken compared to like any other skill early on. It does a really good job at clearing Mervale and, each subsequent boss up until Act 3. So from here, you'll just be coasting off until Act 3. And once you get to Act 3, which I will scrub to here at some point, but once you get to Act 3, that is when you want to be doing the laboratory. So laboratory is where you want to be farming Viper Strike with Mamba, and then eventually where you want to be setting up your character for the swap. So this is right after the swap. And what I did is I have the very usual, as you can see, just like garbage 4 links here and there, trying to manage my supports as well as trying to manage my attributes. But I'm using one-handed swords and the ones that are 2x3. So these wider ones. And the reason for that is because they have higher base damage, and all you're looking for is just the highest amount of base damage possible onto your weapon. Physical damage and chaos damage. Everything else is useless because obviously only physical and chaos damage can poison until you get access to pneumatic daggers until the late game. But I will sort of show what that looks like here. And what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that my flasks are up when I need them. So anytime I kill a monster, I want to make sure that I have at least one flask active. That is the main nuisance with leveling Viper Strike with Mamba early. But Alchemist Mark does a really good job at like clearing packs when it spawns as well. Like it does a lot of dot damage. But overall, I was very pleasantly surprised with the effectiveness of Viper Strike with Mamba through the campaign. And most importantly, also the single target, as the campaign tends to, you know, kind of be a bit of a boss rush type of experience, right? So, you know, early on, it's sort of like, it's not amazing, but it starts to get better and better and better. And especially when you get to the second and third lab, when you unlock access to, you know, regaining charges from your flasks and things like that, you just get like way better quality of life and effectiveness of your clear in general. And it tends to really start to pop off towards the end of the campaign. And unfortunately, it does taper off if you do not get clusters. But since the clusters are item level 68 plus for low tolerance, they do start appearing on the market quite early. Or you could potentially also, if you're playing SSF, farm them yourself quite early, and it's not really a problem whatsoever to get those, because if you spec the Delhi Keystone and some of the cluster jewel drop chance, you'll just be effectively getting all of the clusters you need in pretty short amount of time. All right, so I skipped a little bit to Chaos Stronghold, so you can see what the single target looks like on Chaos, and it's very respectable, honestly. This is just with weapons that I found from the vendor and doing the rustic sash recipe, so just like a rustic sash with a whetstone of, you know, the rustic sash should be ideally of rare rarity, so you get a higher percent of physical damage on there, and then you can just chuck a craft on it, and it does pretty good damage to the bosses overall. And I was just, yeah, I was kind of just popping off on all of these bosses, very surprisingly. And the bigger benefit of this essentially is that if you are one of those players that likes to swap to the skill that you'll be playing in endgame early, it's perfect for that, right? Like, yes, it's not as optimal as Poison Concoction of Bouncing, but it also means that you do not have to play Poison Concoction of Bouncing. And if you're like me, I'm a massive Poison Concoction of Bouncing hater. Possibly because I've just played it too much. You know, it seems to be like the go-to thing for every fucking build. So yeah, I just kind of like don't like that skill. And any reason to not play it is a good reason. And if I can not play it, I will not play it. And if you're doing this much damage, honestly, and like your clear is not complete garbage, like, why? For me, in my opinion, there's no really real reason to do it. But as I did say, like, as you're progressing into red maps, like, you definitely want to be prioritizing getting clusters, because it's by far the biggest update or upgrade. And as you can see here from the weapon, this is the weapon that I'm using. It's just a blue weapon with 67%. It's literally a wicked war sword with 67% physical damage. That's all that's on it, and I'm absolutely obliterating the rest. So and that's with Viper Strike of Mamba. So the downside, of course, is that you do have to run normal lab, or you have to buy the Viper Strike of Mamba skill gem. But if you don't want to do either of those things, you can just keep progressing with normal Poison Concoction or Poison Concoction of Bouncing, which I do have a specific tree for that as well in the path of building for anybody that wants to take a look at that. The progression in maps is, you know, quite decent as well. Just make sure that you get your clusters, and ideally you want to be rushing towards getting your pneumatic daggers, because pneumatic daggers are a way for you to poison with any kind of damage. So elemental damage will contribute to your poison magnitude, essentially allowing you to stack elemental damage on your jewelry, on your weapons, and things like that. Potentially also on auras, like if you want to run an anger instead of like malevolence or something like that. But Yeah, so here in this VOD, we're getting to the later acts, and now my flasks are kind of a lot better than they were at the start, because we're just gaining charges, you know, more and more, making it easier for me to keep the proliferation up. Although, like, I'm not super well maintaining that, but yeah. And the rest of the progression through the campaign is fairly smooth. I end up getting 2 maps, and just by continually upgrading my weapons, just by doing the rustic stash recipe and things like that. Once I do get to maps, it's also fairly smooth sailing to T16s as I farm the clusters and roll low tolerance on them. So, all right, so the cluster that you absolutely want to get, going to be a medium cluster chaos damage over time. You absolutely want this to be a 4 passive cluster. The reason for that is because if it's a 5 passive cluster, and you roll 1 notable on it, low tolerance, which is what we'll be aiming to do, you'll have to pass through an additional node, get to low tolerance, or your jewel socket. So that's not ideal. And if we scroll down here, you can see that low tolerance is an item level 68 requirement. So what we'll do is, as you can see, if my item level is capped, so like item level 100, it's going to be 108 alterations. But if you bring that down to 68, it brings that down by like about 10 or something like that, right? It saves you a bit of alterations. So overall, getting these clusters with low tolerance on them is just extremely easy. It's on average 92 alteration orbs, which is very accessible on League Start and not a problem whatsoever. But getting 2 notables on here is pretty difficult. Although the best notable that you ideally want to be getting is one that gives you life flask regeneration, because we will be using that Ascendancy Master Surgeon to prop up our life regeneration and things like that. Let me just remember what it is called. Right here, Brute for Potency, as you can see. So that's going to be giving us 20% life and mana recovery rate from flasks, as well as a little bit of damage over time. And importantly, these flask charges gain, which is just really nice to have our full uptime on flasks. But if I did want to have actually both of these notables on my cluster jewel, then it gets pretty rough. It gets really expensive. So yeah, I would not recommend you know, trying to get these early. As you can see, it's like on average 1,300. So you're kind of just aiming to either get lucky, purchase them, or settle for any other notable. There are other ways to do this, of course. Like, for example, if you were to use fossils, if we change it here, we need to compute the best selection. Hopefully it should be easier to roll them, but I suspect it's just going to be just as expensive to get that. So the idea here is that you build up a bunch of clusters, you scour out them, use binding orbs or whatever else, and then yeah. But if we were to put them in P1, P2, you can see that it's quite expensive to actually roll these clusters overall. So yeah, 1 passive notable clusters, very easy. 2, not quite as easy. As you can see, on average, like 1,000 chaos orbs. So it's probably better to just scour out clusters and settle for any other notable. All right, so let's take a quick look at the POB now. This right here, the second step, and you can use the loadouts here at the top right to keep everything sort of connected to each other. There's gear loadouts, skill loadouts, as well as configs that sort of match each step of progression. So just a reminder to go through that. At this point, we're just using 3 mod swords, and it's a Legion sword. Now, what you want to do here is at item level 83 is when you want to be picking up your Legion swords. It's really important that they're item level 83, because I can showcase it here. If we go back onto Craft of Exile, and we can go for swords. All right, so that's the base that we want, the Legion sword. That's because it has the highest amount of flat damage on it. The attack speed doesn't matter, since you can only stack up to 1 poison maximum. So you just want the highest amount of flat damage possible, and we want a Legion sword. And the importance of the item level 83 is because item level 83 is when we can guarantee roll flat chaos damage. And if we were to then turn this into a rare and use Harvest, Reforge Chaos, Reforge and not add, you can see that this guarantees chaos damage. So that's exactly what we want. We want to be spam rolling with the Harvest bench until we get like a decent second modifier, like flat physical damage or percent physical damage. So this already would be great. This is actually like quite insane as a starting weapon, and took us 3 reforges, because you can see in the POB that I've basically just accounted for flat chaos damage with very sort of like, what is that? T4 flat fizz, and then just crafted physical damage from the bench, right? And with this kind of gear, and this is the only place where we're realistically getting damage. Everywhere else is just defensive stuff. We do have an amulet with dot multi, actually, I lied. And everywhere else is just defensive stuff. We're getting about 1.4 million combined damage with our alchemist mark, and presumably this is on a 5 link too, just to remind you. Presumably, like, 1.3 million damage is like plenty to get you to T16s at this point, and ideally by the time you get to T16s, you want to be having either a 6 link or a couple of clusters, and that's where the next step of progression here in the loadouts comes in. That's where you'll be getting a bunch of clusters. And now that we have a couple of clusters, you can see that the damage has shot up to about 4 million, and we are keeping the exact same gear. So the exact same gear as before, just these like complete garbage swords and the same no damage type of gear. We are getting about 4.2 million damage, which is highly respectable, as well as on top of having very good recovery from our life flasks because of Master Surgeon, and decent defenses overall. But mind you, you are a Pathfinder, so you are kind of very reliant on your flasks. So making sure that you get as much charge recovery, rolling your flasks well is extremely important for this build. I cannot stress it enough how important it is to do that. It's like if your flasks are down, you're basically screwed on this build. So keep that in mind. And talking about flasks, actually, there's 2 ways to go about flasks. On soft core, I would recommend you just go for a Taste of Hate to shift some of the elemental damage you take as cold damage, and then pumping up that max cold res to, as you can see here, 82. And if I hover over this Taste of Hate, you can see that it's giving me about 12% effective max hit for elemental damage outside of cold, and about 30% for cold. This kind of circumvents the need for going for a tri-ele flask, because the downside of having a tri-ele flask on this build specifically that needs Sorrow of the Divine is that then you can't use a Quicksilver and you can't use a Silver, meaning your movement speed is going to be kind of low and your attack speed is going to feel a little bit clunky early. So I think Taste of Hate is like a really good sort of alternative that sacrifices defense for offense. And to talk about Sorrow of the Divine and how just insane this flask is for this character, this allows your life flask to also apply to your energy shield on top of your life. And since we are using Master Surgeon, which makes it so that our life flask keeps healing us even after our life is full, that also converts to energy shield heal. So that means that we're getting, on top of 1,000 energy shield recovery per second, we have 1,000 life recovery per second as well, which is quite OP. And the more we juice that later on, obviously the stronger it gets. And you can get also tattoos, which give you life recovery from flasks. So essentially you want to use as many tattoos as possible until you're basically just like running out of dexterity to equip your gear. That would be the idea there. For the remainder of the Ascendancy, it's kind of just the box standard Pathfinder stuff. And ideally, this is quite a strong node. It's about 20% damage because we are using Withering Step. And so having 50% increased effective Wither from Withering Step is pretty good. That's a lot of damage. But if there is any sort of Bloodline Ascendancy that pops up that is very strong for this build, then I'll probably like swap that one out for this. But until they show us all of the Bloodline Ascendancies, there's nothing really yet that I can recommend from what we saw. So yeah. The later step of progression is ideally when you want to be getting pneumatic daggers. And what pneumatic daggers allow you to do is allow you to craft for elemental damage, as you can see here on the pneumatic dagger. These are very, very easy to craft. It's like super easy to craft. You just grab an essence, you look for another T1 elemental modifier. If there's any non-attack modifiers, you can use roll attack mods and annul it. And then potentially just like multi-mod it straight off of that. You can even multi-mod a 2-mod, but if you can get damage over time multiplier on it, that's pretty good as well. Another alternative would be to, if you reforge Chaos once your prefixes are full with the Harvest, this guarantees chaos.multi on the suffix, allowing you to then craft something other than chaos.multi, like potentially attack speed if you want to go faster with Whirling Blades or something like that. It is a bit of a DPS loss, but it's a quality of life gain. And at this point, once you go for pneumatic daggers, your damage starts to be pretty respectable. So we're about 9 million damage at this point with a multi-modded dagger. Keep in mind that like 9 million damage on this build is just feels insane because of the fact that how proliferation works. And I'll explain a little bit later how proliferation works, just so you guys are sort of like on the same page as me on that one. But yeah, pneumatic daggers are really, really strong. The alternative would be to go for the Whispers of Infinity Amulet, which is already accounted for the nerfs here with 100 max energy shield. However, I think this is more of an endgame thing you should aim for and not necessarily a progression thing. And since I do feel like a lot of people will be aiming to do heist this league because of the changes, I do think that getting one pneumatic dagger and then splitting it with a split beast is gonna be fairly achievable. Especially since like you could also just like go get it yourself by running blueprints. The blueprints that you drop, it's very SSFable. I've done it many times at SSF myself. So it should really not be a problem. Like one day in SSF farming blueprints, you should have these unless you're like unlucky. The rest of the gear is just going to be bog standard, suppress, evasion, energy shield gear. The reason why energy shield is so important on this build is because of our ES recovery and Sorrow of the Divine, as well as our flask. You want to be pumping your life numbers as well as your energy shield numbers as high as possible. Get that huge recovery. It feels like even crazier than Slayer Overleech once you pump it. And you want to also get a Glorious Vanity, which is sacrificed in the name of Doriani, because this gives you Corrupted Soul, and Corrupted Soul is just basically 15% of life as extra maximum energy shield, giving us like 1200 ES, which is just, yeah, just a crazy amount of extra life that increases our EHP by about 15%. So get that as well. And if you are struggling on strength, you could also alternatively go for a Lethal Pride and just chuck it here and go for ailments deal damage faster. That's potentially something you can do, but I recommend Glorious Vanity over that. But yeah, do keep in mind that since we are using overexert support, like your strength requirements are going to be quite high. So you will have to pop a couple of strength rolls on your gear here and there to make sure that you're keeping up with your strength requirements. Though keep in mind that you do not have to have auto exertion at level 20, and if you do down level this, it's gonna drastically decrease the strength requirements that you need by like 50 strength requirement basically by just taking that down from level 20 to level 10, and all you're realistically losing is a couple of cooldown recovery rate points, which is it's really not needed for anything. Talking about auto exertion, as soon as you swap to Mamba, you want to be using auto exertion Ancestral Cry. This is going to be giving you 2 additional strikes, and then you'll also want to be using auto exertion, Battle Mage's Cry, Alchemist Mark, and Despair. It's very important that you have this combination, because this is going to allow you to automatically trigger your Alchemist Mark by exerting your Viper Strike, and also automatically be triggering Despair to curse enemies on hit. This is basically just like a curse on hit setup, which lets you pop Alchemist Mark every couple of hits as well as Despair. So it's just insane quality of life that you get by having that setup. And yeah, just get that as soon as you swap to Viper Strike with Mamba, because it's just this is kind of what makes the build really good in comparison to before. It's just like it becomes like a one button build combination with obviously having like Blood Rage or Ambush if you just want that extra little bit of burst, and Whirling Blades and Withering Step, for example, to allow you to get those withered stacks on the enemy. The main downside of this is, of course, that you are pretty much relying on Withering Step for that extra amount of damage. I have programmed 14 Wither stacks here in the config, and when you remove that, it's about like half of your damage. It's Wither is insane for poison builds, but there might be a way for us to get Withered in another way. So if I go to pathofexile.com/keepers and scroll down a little bit, you see that we're getting grafts. We got these grafts here, and this one spawns minions, and those minions apply Brittle on hit. We can only hope that we have one that also applies Wither on hit, and if we have that, then that's pretty insane. But they also showed Heart of Flame, which is basically just Molten Shell. I feel like almost anybody's gonna want to have this, but an extra 4,500 damage is absorbed by this shield once every 20 seconds, which on builds that have a relative amount of avoidance, through evasion or anything like that, are just going to insanely benefit from this, and it's going to be a huge sort of cushion. Make sure that you're not dying. So yeah, these are pretty crazy, but keep an eye on the channel and what happens in the future, because we don't know yet what these are going to bring, but presumably they're going to bring a lot of changes to the builds. The Foulborn Fortune Uniques as well are going to be pretty cool too. And lastly, of course, the new Bloodline Ascendancies. So far, I haven't really seen something that really stood out to me for the Bloodline Ascendancies, specifically for this build, but there are still 7 Bloodline Ascendancies that they haven't shown us, so fingers crossed. Hopefully we have something that pops off. That kind of sums up everything so far about this build. I will be doing a more in-depth build with leveling guide and kind of things like that. If you want to pop by the stream, I will be doing leveling runs for the next few days to figure out exactly the optimal leveling route for you guys, for Viper Strike of MAMBA specifically, so swapping at the first lab. But if just to give you guys like a very quick what I would do, let's go here and make a new tree and call it leveling. So I'll go through here first of all, because we are using Poison Concoction of Bouncing. The first thing I do is I grab this so that we can actually equip any gem that needs intelligence, like Frostblink, and then I would grab the life. And from this point, since you are playing Poison Concoction of Bouncing, you want to be grabbing the life flask stuff. So you go here and you grab 1 flask every 3 seconds. Although you can also sort of delay this if you don't want to regret this, but I feel like it's worth doing because the regrets are so cheap now with gold. Not really a problem whatsoever. Then we path through the life and we go down here. The first thing I would do is I would either go for Swift Venoms or I would go for Toxic Strikes. So either Toxic Strikes or Swift Venom are both good. Then we go up here, we grab the life to make sure that we are keeping healthy. Grab the accuracy wherever possible. And of course you can grab the 300 accuracy as well. I say 300, but early levels it's much more than that. You can also grab that little life node there. And then we want to sort of be pathing up to Fatal Toxin. Once you got Fatal Toxin, you can go for the live. And from here, you're kind of just, you know, bridging that part with this part, essentially. And it's kind of just everything sort of would fall in place and make sense. Like when you need to fit your auras, you would go for Charisma. When you need to fit more stuff, you would go for Leadership. Or otherwise, from there, you would bridge into these nodes. And eventually, once you get access to, you know, both your curses, you can go for Whispers of Doom. So until you have Whispers of Doom, you do not want to have Despair in your links. But later on, once you get Whispers, you know, you just chuck that on, and you get Despair as well as Alchemist Mark. And yeah, early on we're using Ghost Dance as well, and later on we unspec it because our flask is going to be keeping us pretty healthy. And yeah, that kind of about sums it all up. So that is my league start plan. I'll give you guys a more detailed sort of idea of what I plan to farm, as well as how to level, as well as a full in-depth max roll guide, giving you guys a more, yeah, better understanding of like how to level it, the progression, the stat priorities, and all that kind of stuff coming towards later in the week. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hope you yeah, hope to see you guys soon. And thanks for watching. Appreciate you.